Welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar on the EU Deforestation Regulation in the cocoa sector. Today we will discuss the EUDR, and I am very excited about today, and I hope that you are too. I have seen that our attendees come from all over the world. Altogether, we have subscriptions from 65 different countries showing interest in this topic. We have subscriptions from all the top 7 cocoa producing countries, which are Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Ecuador, Cameroon, Nigeria, Brazil, and Indonesia. Especially Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ecuador are highly represented. Welcome to you. But we are equally happy with those representing the smaller cocoa producing countries. A lot of producers and traders from Colombia, Uganda, India, Peru, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Trinidad and Tobago, Bolivia, Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, and many other countries are represented. This is already our second webinar with a focus on the EUDR, and it seems that interest remains high. In October last year, we organized a webinar on broader sustainability aspects with a special focus on the EUDR. If you missed that, check the CBI website or CBI's YouTube channel where this is still available. My name is Tjelling de Boer. I am leading the research team for the coffee and cocoa sector on behalf of CBI, and today I am your moderator. Now let's talk about the program of today. The main goals of today are to inform you on the basics of the EUDR, to inform you on enforcement and supervision of the EUDR, to give you practical tips on what you as an exporter or farmer group can do to prepare for the EUDR, and to answer your personal questions on the EUDR. But before we get started, we need to explain something about GoToWebinar, which is the tool that we use for this session. Now, the tool is really simple, and you only have a few elements in your menu. First of all, you need to know that we cannot see or hear you, so you can wave at us, but we won't notice. However, you do have the option to post questions in the field under questions, and I really invite you to do so. We don't have time to answer all of the questions, but we will try to answer as many questions as possible during this webinar. And also on the background, a team of CBI members is available to answer some of the questions. So please add your questions to the question page. Now, as mentioned before, I'm not here alone. Most content will actually be shared by our panel of experts. Ruben, Julius, and Jessica, please turn on your cameras. Could you please introduce yourself? Ruben, can you start, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruben Bergsma. I'm part of the research team doing research on cocoa and coffee, working with Tjelling.
Thanks a lot. Jessica, could you follow up?
Hello everyone, my name is Jessica and I'm working for the Dutch Competent Authority, the NVWA.
Thanks a lot. How about you, Julius?
Hello everyone, nice to see such a high turnout from around the world. My name is Julius Seinen. I work for the Netherlands Ministry for Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, and I'm coordinating the work on the EUDR.
Thanks a lot. Now, thanks for introducing yourself. We will be hearing a lot more from you during this webinar. But before that, I would like to ask Mirte to turn on her camera. Hello, Mirte. Well, this webinar is hosted by CBI. Could you please introduce yourself and CBI to those unfamiliar with us?
Yes, of course. So thank you all, and thank you all for tuning in. And it's very wonderful to see we have so many people joining us today. So my name is Mirte van der Gaast, and I work as a program manager market intelligence at CBI, which is the Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. Some of you might already be familiar with who we are, but let me just give you a very quick introduction about what we do and just in a nutshell, some of the activities. So CBI's main mission is to support the transition towards sustainable and inclusive economies. We do this by connecting SMEs from developing countries to the European and regional markets. And thereby we focus on promoting and creating decent jobs, specifically for women and youth. And we stimulate sustainable trade and production. Our starting point are SMEs, and we offer practical solutions to eliminate bottlenecks experienced in the value chain. And in many cases, barriers can, for example, be a lack of access to good quality market information. So our approach is twofold. Firstly, we implement projects in our focus countries, whereby we help prepare SMEs to successfully enter international markets. We provide hands-on and tailored assistance specifically to their needs. And this can be assistance in terms of export marketing, matchmaking, product development, branding, CSR, and so on. And secondly, we provide market information on the European market, on how to export your products and services. And via our projects, we support on average around 600 SMEs per year, and for which we work very closely with local stakeholders. This can be export promotion agencies, ministries, as well as sector associations. And over the years, we have built a very extensive network of local and international experts that we actively involve in our projects. So CDI is active in 23 countries, predominantly in Africa. And we have completed in the past years also several cocoa projects. Most recently, we completed projects in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And we are currently developing new projects as well. So we are based in The Hague, the Netherlands, and we are part of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, RVO, and funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Next. So just for the sake of time, let me just only quickly delve into the market intelligence services that we provide, which is also the team that I am part of. So we have over 30 years of experience in developing high quality market intelligence reports about the European markets. And this includes market research, market access requirements, product or country fact sheets, as well as tips on how to find buyers, as well as how to go green, how to go digital. And every year we publish around 300 studies on our websites. We work predominantly in 14 sectors, mainly in agriculture, such as cocoa, coffee, fruit and vegetables, spices, but we're also active in the service industries, which is tourism and IT outsourcing. So very good to mention is all the information is freely accessible on our website. So please make sure to stick around till the end of this webinar, as I will be able to give you a quick tour on how to find this information. Back to you, Charlie.
Thanks a lot, Mette. That was very clear. Now let's start talking about the EUDR. And I wonder where you, our audience, stands. Please give an answer to the question that will be shown on your screen in a minute. It should be there right now. So I am wondering, what is your knowledge of the EUDR? Do you have limited knowledge? Do you think you have basic knowledge or extensive knowledge? Please provide your answer. You could just click on it. I see that many answers are coming in. Thanks for participating so actively. I give you a few more seconds to provide an answer. Okay, be closing the poll in 3 seconds. Okay, now it seems that most of you do have some knowledge. Basic knowledge is mostly mentioned, and some already have extensive knowledge. Now, Julius, it seems that most of our attendees do have already some knowledge, but could you please explain us the key elements of the EUDR?
Yes, of course, Charlie. So I hope you can all see my screen now. Yeah, it's good to see that well, more than half of you already have basic knowledge, and some of you have already extensive knowledge, which is always welcome to see. But also a large group has limited knowledge. So what I will do now is slowly take you along the basics of the EUDR, and also tell you a little bit about what this means in the end, or what this can mean for producers, and how buyers and producers will probably have to interact with one another. But first things first, what is the EUDR? The EUDR was announced in 2019, so already 5 years ago, on the basis of EU consumers, but also partly the EU market, looking at deforestation, looking at the impact on climate, and seeing that despite efforts being done on promoting responsible business conduct and so on, that we as large consumer markets have a role to play in achieving the climate and biodiversity goals we signed on multinational level. So the EUDR was published by the European Commission as a response to that call in 2019. And in 2021, the European Commission presented the proposal of the EUDR, which followed a year of intensive negotiations within the EU, within the Commission, with the Council, so the Member States and the Parliament. And in December 2022, we reached an agreement after which the EUDR was presented and activated into force on the 29th of June 2023, so about a year ago. What is in it? So we get many questions, and first and foremost, I wanted to draw your attention to, if you have not read the EUDR itself, the regulation, I would invite you to have a look at it, and particularly, first of all, look at Annex 1. Annex 1 depicts or stipulates which products and commodities are included and which ones are not. And it is very important to bear in mind for those with limited and perhaps also those with basic knowledge that if your product or commodity is listed in Annex 1, then it falls under the EUDR. In case you don't see your product listed in that Annex 1, your product doesn't fall under the scope of the EUDR. This is, as a starter, very important to bear in mind. So if your product is not in there, you don't have to comply to the regulations that the EUDR is putting on these commodities. So for some products that are perhaps derivatives of cocoa as well, they do not fall under the EUDR. Many do. So what does it further say? Well, products to be allowed to enter the EU market, market operators and traders, they will have to comply to a number of things. First of all, every batch of products has to be has to include a due diligence statement and geolocations and product information that is submitted in a yet to be developed information system to be allowed to enter the EU. This is a process that operators and traders have to do, and in addition, they will have to show, in case our competent authorities in the EU check, that their products comply to them being deforestation-free, legally produced, and fully traceable to the plot of land where they were produced. And this is done through a so-called due diligence process. And the checks done by competent authorities in EU member states will focus on this due diligence process that traders and market operators will have to do under the EUDR. These rules, they apply for commodities and products coming from all over the world. So in case for the Netherlands, we also produce cattle, for example. Also, our producers here in the Netherlands, they will have to comply to the EUDR regulation, like many of you also have. So there is no distinction made between non-EU and EU countries, for example. The EUDR accounts for all countries. But what does this actually mean, this due diligence for operators? What does it entail? I will come to that in a bit. But first of all, we get many questions on for whom does it count and who needs to show the due diligence and who needs to comply to the EUDR. as I said, it is for operators and traders, these are companies, that are involved in least at one of the activities listed here. So that place on the EU market, so they import a product or it's domestically EU produced and they place it on the market. They make it available through trade, or in case they export it from the EU markets, for instance, from the Netherlands to the United Kingdom or to the United States, for example. And this also counts for re-import. So if you export it to the UK and it comes back to the Netherlands, you need to do this process again. So all companies involved in these activities, they are the ones that are responsible for doing this due diligence and showing compliance with the EUDR. So if you're not involved in these activities, the EUDR may be affecting you, but you are not the one having to do the due diligence and show our competent authorities the due diligence you have done and provide us with the information. That is reserved for the operators and traders of this regulation. So what do the operators and traders need to do exactly? There are a few requirements, and I wanted to mention them here because these requirements will have an effect on producers, sellers of, in this case, cocoa. So first of all, stipulated by Article 9 in the EUDR, there are information requirements. So what is the product? How much? The quantity of the product? Where does it come from? What is the origin? Who are you selling it to? Who did you buy it from? And new to the EUDR is the geolocation of the plots of land where the product or the commodity was produced. All of the plots of land where it was produced. And furthermore, the proof that the product was produced in accordance with the relevant legislation on all the production areas. So this can be international law that a country has ratified, but also subnational or national laws specifically applicable to that plot of land. Then, based on that information, operators and traders, they have to do an investigation into the supply chain and establish that the risk related to deforestation and the legality is negligible or non-existent. So they have to ensure through this process that we call due diligence that the products that they put onto the European market are compliant with the EUDR. And in this process, they require the information from Article 9. Then there's a third step they need to do, so the risk mitigation, which is part of the due diligence process, so adjusting based on your findings. So if there is risk found, you have to ensure that there is no risk involved, and you have to maintain this due diligence system. This is not something you do as an operator or trader only once. This is ideally done on a continuous basis and can also be adjusted if perhaps signals from either within your due diligence process or from outside your own company or sphere of influence reach you. And lastly, the operators and traders have to report on this process and their due diligence system. So these are generally the requirements as set out by the EUDR that count for operators and traders. And now I would like to have a last slide on what this means for buyers, but also producers of cocoa in this example. So to reiterate, the operators and traders, they bear the burden to show compliance with the EUDR. So if you're not importing to the EU or exporting to the EU yourself, you are not the one that has to comply to the EUDR. But if you are, you have to comply to all the steps that I just mentioned. What operators and traders need to do, they have to provide evidence that the products comply, and they need to have access to all this information that I just mentioned. This information, it needs to travel along the supply chain, from the geolocation to the legality documents and so on. And these have to, of course, be collected, but verified, stored, and provided for these operators and traders. Sometimes they can do this within their own supply chains, so it's their direct supply chain, but many of these supply chains that we're dealing with are indirect. So also in indirect supply chains, this information needs to be available. Furthermore, this information and these documents, they have to be verifiable, reliable, and up to date for operators and traders if they're going to rely on them. And that means that producers and sellers of cocoa in origin will need to have this information for the operators and traders. They will ask for this information, and you might already have been asked. But this can also mean, for example, in some countries, that governments need to provide access to this kind of information. So there is not only an interaction going on between operators and traders, but also and producers, but also with governments. And something I would like to mention here as well already is the third-party verification data. Think of certification. They can also play a role in this information. And with that, I would like to give it back to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Julius. Now, I think that was a very clear explanation of what the EUDR entails. But I can also imagine that you do have some questions about what it would mean, to you or whatever. So please, if you do have questions, add those to the question pane. Now, while you be thinking about the questions that you have, I do also have a question, another question for you. And it should be appearing right now on your screen. Did you prepare for the EUDR? Please add your answer to the question. I didn't start yet. We started preparing for the EUDR, or we already ready for the EUDR? Please submit your answer. And if you do so, if you've already done so, please add your questions for us, which we can answer in a few minutes from now. Okay, a lot of answers are coming in. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, so these are your answers. So most of you already started preparing on the EUDR, which is great to notice. Jessica, Julius just explained to us what the EUDR entails and what that will mean for both buyers and suppliers. Can you give us a deeper dive into how this regulation will be enforced and supervised? Who is responsible for which part, and how will these checks be performed?
Well, thank you, Charlie. Thank you for the opportunity to explain more about the control steps that the Dutch government will take with respect to the EUDR. Let me first, indeed, as my colleague Julius already told, let me emphasize that these control steps that we're talking about now are the obligations that need to be met by the importers into the EU. So most of the producers will never get in touch with the Dutch government. Let me use this figure in order to explain a little bit better how this will work. You can see on the left side that goods are being prepared to enter the European Union, and you can see the customs border over there. In order for these goods that are in the scope of the EUDR, in order for these goods to be able to cross that border, the operator needs to, so the operator is the importer, needs to issue a due diligence statement. This needs to be done in the traces system. This is a customs system. And in that due diligence statement, the operator needs to put down the geolocation points where the product is coming from, if there is indeed a risk, so no risks with respect to the EUDR. And the operator needs to fill out many more details in that specific form. Once he has done that, the form will create a code, a due diligence statement code. This will need to be used in order to fulfill all importing requirements at customs. Any product that is in the scope of the EUDR without that specific due diligence code cannot be accepted by customs. Customs then will do regular checks on these due diligence statement codes and the products that accompany it. And if no issues are found, then the product will just go through the system and be imported into the EU. However, if customs does find any irregularities, then these products or these shipments will fall to the competent authority, the NVWA. If that is the case, then we will perform checks on that shipment and contact the specific trader that is involved in order to get more information. That's it. Then we'll go to the next slide. Indeed, in order to perform our checks, we will not check every shipment at the border because that is not what the regulation requires from the competent authority. We will do regular checks on companies that already have imported these goods into the European Union. And when we're checking those companies, we will be looking at the system they use in order to meet the requirements of the EUDR. We will not be checking every company constantly. We will take a risk-based approach that will identify high risks when it comes to compliance under the EUDR. We will get information, of course, from the European Commission about the risks they have identified in several countries. And we will also develop our own information system when it comes to identifying these risks. We will also be learning from previous experiences, like under the EUDR. At this moment, all countries worldwide are in a 3% risk, like a standard risk scenario. That means that we will be inspecting 3% of all importing and producing countries within the Netherlands every year. I think we're going to the next slide. How will we perform these checks? At first, we will select a company and we will contact that company and ask them to supply us with information about a specific delivery. So provide us all the details about the specific delivery that they have used in order to prove that they have met the requirements of the EUDR. We will either go to the company physically or ask them to supply us with all information through our digital system. And then we will review different parts. For example, is there a list of required documents present? So we expect that the importer, the operator, knows which documents have to be presented in order to prove that they comply with the legislation on the ground. Another thing is that we would like to see that these operators have done a risk assessment and, if necessary, a risk mitigation. They have to follow the different steps that the EUDR requires. So first, collect all information, then perform a risk assessment. And if any risks are identified during that risk assessment, they will have to mitigate. This package then has to be and analyzed, and there is then a conclusion to be drawn by the importer. Can I import these goods under EUDR or not? If there are still risks that can't be mitigated, these goods cannot be imported. Another thing that we will assess is the total functioning of the due diligence system. Is this system robust enough to deal with any irregularities that occur, and are the decisions that are made by the management logic and a conclusion of the information and the risk assessment that have been gathered? If all is found to be okay, then we, the Dutch competent authority, will inform the company that everything is okay and that the company can continue as they did before. If not okay, the company will get a certain amount of time, for example, half a year or shorter or longer, in order to improve its procedures and its way of buying or treating EUDR. And then we will come back again, and if no improvement is made or not sufficient, we will actually fine the company.
Thank you very much, Jessica. That was very clear. Now, in the meantime, I saw that really a lot of answers were questions were coming in. So thanks a lot about that, about participating so actively again. So that is great. Mirte, could you please take the floor and answer some of those questions with our experts?
Yes, of course. Thank you all for giving all these answers to our wonderful presenters. So the very first question is actually a question to Ruben, which is actually regarding the benefits of the EUDR. Can you explain how cooperative can actually benefit from complying with the EUDR?
Thank you, Mirte, and thank you for that question. I think I'm really happy with that question. It's something that I will get into later in this webinar as well, but I think it's important to mention. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to become compliant, but I think it can have a lot of benefits as well. Two of those benefits are that, of course, if you're selling, if your cocoa ends up in the EU markets, then they will need that data in order to be able to place it on the EU market, as Julius and Jessica just explained. So it can help you to keep selling to your current buyers. And if producers have access to all of that data, that's geolocation data and traceability information, then it also creates opportunities to find new buyers that are buying to place on the EU market. So it's also an opportunity for growth and finding new buyers. So having that information and data ready can be a great benefit to a farmer group or cooperative or producer. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ruben. So I have another question for Julius. Of course, we know there's quite some steps you need to take in order to comply with the EUDR, which also means costs. Can you explain whether there are any funding support from the EU to address deforestation on cocoa plantations?
Thank you for that question. Categorically, yes. Whether it will be not enough for all the plantations around the world and all the smallholders, I doubt. So there is an EU instrument, the Team Europe Initiative on Deforestation, that has been launched by the EU, to which the Netherlands also contributed 20 million to support the implementation of the EUDR. So that is an instrument that is available. But next to EU initiated support, there is also bilateral support given by some EU member states. The Netherlands is one of them through our international cooperation instruments, also, for example, through the work of CBI, that perhaps do not focus directly on the EUDR, but focus on the supply chain in general. So there is definitely support out there, but I also have to say the challenges and the scope is large. So the existing EU Team Europe Initiative on Deforestation cannot reach all, but the hub the knowledge hub that will come available as part of the Team Europe initiative on deforestation, and the information being exchanged and published on there is accessible to all, so it can be used by all.
Okay, thank you so much. I actually have another question for Jessica. Can you explain how the Dutch competent authority will check the legality criteria? So in terms whether it's produced in accordance with relevant legislation of the country of production. Are there any guidelines?
Well, we are of course known with the fact that many countries have different legislation when it comes to like everything, land rights, land title, or whatever. So we will focus on the applicable legislation in any country, and we are also very aware of the fact that it could often mean that there is no actual paperwork, but there are other systems that are used in order to prove that indeed the commodities are produced on the country legally. So we have quite a, I would say, a flexible approach in which we are focusing on what is required where.
Okay, wonderful to hear that there is some flexibility there regarding to the specific context. So I actually have a question from Uganda for Julius. The question is actually, what actually happens to, for example, cleared land for agriculture? What's going to happen when it's going to be reforested, since it's now being covered in plantations, for example, for cocoa or coffee? Who is actually responsible for providing devices to use geolocation programs? The buyers, organizations, or or maybe the producers themselves. And they say, please be aware that this process can be very expensive for low income organizations.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure if I understand the question correctly, but I will relate it to the EUDR. So the EUDR stipulates that products brought to the EU market have to be deforestation-free after the 31st of December 2020, which is the cutoff date. So products coming from areas that were deforested after that date, they are not eligible for the European market. So in the instance of this example, if a product, cocoa or coffee in this regard, was produced on a plot of land that is deforested after this date, it is not eligible to go to the European market. This doesn't mean that a producer cannot continue its operations, but it just means this product cannot legally come into the EU. As part of the reforestation, that I think that is another question. I think that is not particularly related to the EUDR. The EUDR doesn't, in that case, look at reforestation, but looks at where has deforestation taken place, and if that was for the purpose of producing the goods and commodities that fall under the EUDR, then these products cannot be placed on the EU market. But we don't delve into, and the EUDR doesn't go into reforesting certain areas. I hope this answers the question. Yeah, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much. So we have probably room for 3 more questions. So a question to you, Jessica, is actually, what are some of the consequences of non-compliance with the EUDR? Are there, for example, going to be fines, or maybe in terms of a percentage of the turnover?
Yes, indeed, there are going to be fines, and that will depend on the breach of the regulation, of course, in what type of fines will then follow. But indeed, the 4% turnover fine is quite well known now for EUDR. And that indeed breaching the regulation could result into quite a big fine. But as I've stated before, the first step that we will take is after inspection, once we have found that not all requirements are met, often companies then first get a time period in order to do things better when it comes to, for example, their due diligence process. And only after that moment in time, when we still see that the company isn't adhering the rules of the EUDR, only then we will start processes like that.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have another question, which is regarding the key players and partners in the cocoa value chain, including governments, where there is this whole layer of cost and documentation required to implement the new regulation, considering their very low margins for producer organizations who are faced with a lot of turbulence in the whole cocoa value as it is. So the question is, why will buyers continue to supply to the EU market when there are, for example, also equally good buyers in other parts of the world? Ruben, can you maybe explain what you think is going to be the effect on the trade flows after we now have, the EUDR, which is indeed can be seen as a barrier for some exporters?
That's a good question and good points. And one of the things that I think that I've seen also or heard in the many discussions that I've had with people about this is that, it's going to take a lot of work and financial and in-kind support to make sure that producers and producing countries can comply with the EUDR. And of course, I don't think it's the intention to exclude them from the market. So I think the first step is to make sure that everyone, and I think everyone has a role to play here. Judi has already mentioned some of the instruments from the EU to do this. Everyone has a role to play to make sure that those producers that, and maybe already are compliant because they're not on deforested land, can actually provide the information needed to keep access to the EU. Because I think as we all realize, that there's also markets outside the EU. So the cocoa that is not compliant with the EU can be sold on our other markets. But I think the best way to approach this is to make sure that everyone has keeps access to all markets, and that for that producers and producing countries need support financially and in kind to make sure that we can keep those supply chains. I don't know if that entirely answers your question. I think that also warrants maybe a big discussion as well, but that is my short answer to that question. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much, Ruben. So the final question for this block is actually, I would like to address to Julius. So with follow-up question with regards to support is actually, do you know whether the EU provides any tools or platform where operators or traders can upload their collected geodata in order to do a check on the compliance with the EUDR?
No, there will not be such a system. So what the EU is developing currently, or it's already, so there is an IT system that's already existing. It's called Traces. And that system is being adopted for the application of the EUDR. And this system is going to be used by operators and traders to submit when they place on the market or export from the market a shipment. So combined with the shipment, they have to provide the geolocation data, due diligence statements, and information about the product. This system doesn't check whether it's compliant, so you don't see you don't get a green go. It's just the collection system where this data is supplied by operators and traders. So this is not for producers or sellers. This is really for the operators and traders only, and there's no system in development that will show compliance as such, but there is a EU observatory process ongoing that shows where deforestation is taking place. There's also other organizations that show, based on satellite data, but also on their own research and data, where risk for deforestation and legality is prevalent. So these are data that are publicly accessible and that can be looked at, but there is no such thing as putting your geolocation into a system and then getting a green light, because that will ultimately have to be checked by the competent authorities when they do their checks in the member states. And then the system of due diligence will be checked and the geolocations will be checked, of course, to see whether there has been any deforestation with the associated plots of land where the products came from.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have time later for more questions, so please continue. Any questions that you have, make sure to add them to the question option. I now would like to give the floor back to you, Challing.
Thank you very much, Meerte. Now let's on to a new interesting topic. And we already talked a lot about the European part of the EUDR and what it entails and how it will be enforced. But and we also concluded that the EUDR will apply to importers, but that exporters at the same time need to offer proof that their land has not been deforested recently. Now, Ruben, can you please explain to us how suppliers can prepare for the EUDR?
Certainly. Thank you, Challing, and thank you, Judith and Jessica, for the great overview that you've given so far. So I will talk a little bit more about the exporter perspective. So first, as has been said, but I think it's important to repeat, compliance is the responsibility of the importer or the trader operator in EUDR terms, as Julius explained. So with this diagram, I want to show that the end responsibility for compliance is with the operators and traders. But of course, this diagram is a simplification of reality. There are many more responsibilities and roles than what I've put here. For example, there are many importers that also collect information. But as an exporter, there are things that you can do to help these importers. And it's similar to what I said earlier as the benefits for producers. So what can exporters do? So first of all, as an exporter, you can help the importer by providing accurate data and information that the importer can use to submit in their due diligence statement. So this is the information that Julius was talking about earlier. So that's, for example, the geolocation data for the plots. What exporters can do is collect and supply this information to their buyers to help them with their EUDR compliance. Secondly, it can also be helpful to provide extra assurance on this information. So even if you supply information such as geolocations or traceability data, many importers will still do their own checks on this data. So they might ask you for more proof or assurance that the data is correct. And that is, of course, because they are responsible for the correctness of the information. So they just want to be sure that it is correct. So for an exporter, it's important that you are able to give them this extra assurance that the information is accurate. This can be supported by third-party assurance, for example, with a certification program like Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trades, or by working with a credible service provider. And I'll explain that more in the next slide. But doing this can also help you as an exporter to become more attractive in the EU markets. It can help you find new buyers. And lastly, long-term relationships and trust will also help a lot there. So if you have worked with the buyer for a long time and you have built a trusting relationship with them, then that will also give the importer more confidence that they can rely on the information. So that will help with current buyers and also something to focus on when developing relationships with new buyers. So I want to add one more point before I get into the service providers. So I already mentioned this earlier too, but I think that it's just important that the cocoa industry as a whole continues supporting the producing countries in getting ready for the EUDR as well, because I think that will benefit the entire sector in the end. As for the tools and service providers, so there are many tools and services available to help you with EUDR compliance. Many of these tools are more focused on companies that actually have to prove the compliance. So these are the cocoa importers. But these could also be interesting for the SME exporters from producing countries who are, as Mirta explained earlier, the target audience of the CBI and of the studies that we're writing. So what I think I would like to start with, though, is that first it's important that the exporter understands the EUDR. So that's why it's also great to see so many of you here in the webinar today. I think it's important to not just rely on a service provider to take care of everything, but it's important for an exporter to know what is required by the EUDR. Secondly, there's work that needs to be done by the exporter themselves as well. So it's important to also invest in your own staff and your own internal capacity to work on EUDR compliance. So this cannot all be outsourced to a service provider. It has a lot of benefits too. If there's more internal knowledge and expertise, then you can also search more specifically for a service provider. So maybe you don't need them for every part of EUDR compliance. And by building your own capacity and taking care of the work yourself, you can also save the costs of a service provider, and it gives you more flexibility as an exporter too. You are then less dependent on external parties and the contracts that you have signed with them. That being said, though, there are many service providers available that can offer great support. Many of these service providers have adjusted their offerings to include EUDR services. There are also a lot of new service providers entering the market. So a couple of things to look at. One thing to look at is the track records and the experience of the service provider. So have they been working in the sector for a long time? Do they work with similar companies? Do they publish the results of the work that they've done? You can also look if they have the right expertise. So do they have mapping or traceability experience? Are they based in your country? Have they done projects there? Do they have staff on the grounds? As Challing said, we have people attending from all over the world. So it's important to see if those service providers also have experience there. It can also be important to look at your needs as an exporter. So what are the things that you actually need support on, and can the service provider help with that specifically? And lastly, of course, the contractual terms. So looking at the cost of the contract, the length. So a longer contract can, for example, reduce the cost, but it can lock you into a service that you might not need in a few years. So those are just things to consider that I'm sure many of you have already thought of, but that those are things to consider when you're looking for a service provider. There are also a lot of free tools available, so that's another thing to look at. Judi has just mentioned this one, the Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free value chains. That is one of the initiatives. And that includes other initiatives like the Zero Deforestation Hub, the Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems or SAFE project, and the Technical Facility on Deforestation-Free Value Chains. That's a lot of words, but I would recommend just looking for that, their webpage online, and reading about what they're doing. Of course, it's also possible to record a GPS point or create a polygon map with your smartphone or a global navigation satellite system, GNSS device. So if you already have these tools, of course, then it could be a solution to use these tools for geolocations. The EU Agency for the Space Program, EU SPA, is also developing a free tool, and many service providers also offer free versions of their tools, which is usually a very basic version of the tool, but could be something to look at as well. And if you are part of a certification program, it could be interesting to check if their tools can also help you provide the right information and set up the supply chain for EUDR compliance. We are currently writing a study on how to comply with the EUDR. So that study will include a lot of information about service providers as well and how to work with them. And there we'll get into a lot more detail on the service providers. So we expect that study to be published later this year. So please keep an eye on the CBI website or the newsletter for this study. So thanks for your attention. Back to you, Challing.
Thanks a lot, Ruben, for that very clear explanation. Now, Ruben, you mentioned a lot of tools and service providers. I wonder, Julius, do you have any additional tips from your perspective?
Certainly. Yeah. So I think I would like to add on what Ruben has said, and I was busy looking and going through your questions as well. And I think one of the key aspects, I think, also in regards to the response to the poll, is to really get started. This is one way to inform yourself, but also as a producer, as a consumer, really try to reach out to your buyers, your sellers, but perhaps also to government and inform yourself. It is maybe daunting and it is challenging, and we also recognize the challenges on the ground. Some were reflected in the questions that I read here, and these are known, but bar these questions, the EUDR will come into force, and this will require that the information is going to be there in the future if you, as a producer, but also as a operator or trader, want to keep exporting to the EU and don't lose that market. So I think what I would like to highlight here is, besides the instruments that Ruben just mentioned, that from the Netherlands as well, and we are really happy that CBE is organizing a session like this, but we also have bilateral cooperation with many of the countries that cocoa is sourced from, Western Africa, but also Latin America and Southeast Asia, to name a few, through our international network at the Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality. So we're also looking to organize additional information sessions hosted by them, through which either me and Jessica or other colleagues of the competent authority will delve more in depth in what is required, what information are we going to look at. Within the hour, we didn't have the room to do it today, but please reach out to our embassies, the Netherlands embassies in your countries, to see if there is such a session being organized. So that is what we can do as well to help in that preparation. But I would really say here again, it is challenging, but start. If you wait, there is a risk that time is too short. Bear in mind that SMEs, they do have 6 months longer to prepare themselves. So this may be this may be counting for you if you're an SME importing to the EU. You have 6 months longer to comply, and this may also have effects on who you're sourcing from, as they will also have longer time to comply to these to the regulation. But reach out to your sellers, to your producers, see what they have, see what you need from each other, and get that conversation going as well.
Thanks a lot, Juris. Now, I believe that this is very valuable. I can imagine that it was also a little too much to remember, but we will share these slides with you afterwards. And the recordings will also be available on the CBR platform, so you could always have a second look. Now, Ruben and Julius, you do have a lot of contact with European chocolate companies. I was wondering how they prepare for the EUDR and what they will demand from their suppliers. Ruben, could you start answering this question?
Sure. Thank you, Chaling. So before I continue, I want to make it clear that I don't work for a chocolates or cocoa company myself. I don't represent a company, but I speak with many cocoa and chocolate companies every week. Some of you I've seen in the audience as well, so some of this may be familiar. So I want to share an overview of what I'm hearing in the markets, try to provide a buyer's perspective here. So maybe good to start with that many companies did support the EUDR and have been involved in the development since 2019, what the Julius talked about as well. We hear from companies that it's great that there is a regulation that addresses deforestation, which is so important, but a lot of work needs to be done to comply in time. I want to take a moment to talk about the current situation. Well, you're all very well aware of this, I'm sure, but I think it's good to acknowledge that the current situation provides challenges too. There is a cocoa shortage because of low harvests, especially in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. Some stocks are running out and people are concerned about the crop next year. And as I'm sure you all know, the price of cocoa has also increased tremendously since last year. Prices have decreased somewhat in the past months, but prices are still high, and prices are more volatile than they were last year. So the daily price variations are much larger. So that makes it more expensive and financially risky to maintain a position in the cocoa futures markets. So that all puts even more pressure on the markets. What we do see is that the industry is working very hard to prepare for the EUDR. And it's great to see so many of you preparing already and being fairly familiar with the EUDR already. More and more supply is becoming traceable. For example, the chocolate scorecard reported a large increase in traceability to country level, farmer level, and farmer group level from 2022 to 2023, as the industry was preparing for EUDR compliance this year. And this week, the Retailer Cocoa Collaboration, or the RCC, reported a similar increase in traceability. However, both the chocolate scorecard and the RCC reports that a significant share of the supply is still indirect. That has come up before today as well. So a lot of work still needs to be done to make that part EUDR compliant. So that's more about the context. So what are companies doing about this? So again, the importers are responsible for EUDR compliance. They're the ones that are liable. They therefore want as much control over the supply chain as possible. They want to know that the geolocations are correct. They want to have the producer data. They want to know that the traceability is correct. As one trader told me, we will only ship what we know is compliant, not what we think is compliant. But a large part of the supply chain is still indirect supply. So that supply is not traceable to the source. Traceability is also more difficult on the importer of derivatives, such as cocoa paste, butter, or powder, compared to the import of beans. So for example, Asia imports a lot of cocoa from West Africa, which is processed in Asia. And that processed cocoa could then sometimes be shipped to the EU as well. So there is a lot of shipping, a lot of mixing that takes place during grinding, and that makes it difficult to keep traceability back to the original plots. So for derivatives buyers, it can be more difficult to control the supply chain or get accurate data. So again, if the buyer cannot control that supply, then they want as much assurance as possible that the data is correct. So that could mean third-party assurance, or it could mean working with a service provider. So I think that's where the opportunity is for exporters. That's the target audience of this webinar. So if you as an exporter can give a buyer the right data and the assurance that the cocoa is compliant and provide all that data, then that could really help a lot to continue exporting to the EU. And it can also really help exporters in finding new buyers. So thank you, and back to you, Charlie.
Well, thanks a lot, Ruben. Now you mentioned that, well, EUDR is a top priority at the moment, and how the EUDR has already put the European cocoa market in motion. I was wondering, Julius, could you reflect on this from the perspective of the Dutch government? What are your views on this?
Yeah, thank you. So I can only echo what Ruben has said. I think these signals we are receiving as well. As I previously mentioned, we also noticed that on a government to government level and EU to government level, there is a lot of pushback from governments. And I also saw a question, I believe, that what will happen if a country doesn't take the EUDR seriously? Well, bilaterally, we would really like to cooperate, and as the Netherlands, we have always said the EUDR is an instrument. It is not the means. It is a means to an end, but definitely not the end result. To achieve the sustainability in the supply chain, we need to keep cooperating, and that is what we intend to do as the Netherlands. And that's also why we contributed to the Team Europe initiative on deforestation, for example. So that being said, I think the challenges that we see as governments and going forward as the EU is how can we ensure that the EUDR doesn't lead to associated negative effects by, for example, exclusion and so on, which may in the end lead to other deforestation. And that I think it requires cooperation also from our side, from the EU, as the larger consumer market for many of these goods, that we also have a role to play. And as the Netherlands, we want to take this role and want to cooperate wherever we can. also within the possibilities we have, of course. But what Ruben has said, I can really echo this. We get these signals as well, but for us, we are well on track to implement the EUDR on time. So what we can do from our governance perspective is we can provide you with this certainty that the EUDR will be implemented in the Netherlands on a timely fashion. And together with Jessica and her colleagues, we are also providing insights in what needs to be done, what are the requirements for traders and operators that want to import their goods into the Netherlands, and show you, like we do now, what the process is in more detail. And one of the links as well that I provided in the future will also provide more in-depth information in what is exactly required. So we hope this can help prepare as well, and to ensure that goods keep flowing and there is no market obstruction.
Thank you very much, Julius. Now we're already close to the end of this webinar, but we have quite some time to answer some of your questions. So if you do have any questions, please put it in the question pane. Now, let's go to those questions. Mirte, could you take the floor again and answer some of those questions with our experts?
Yes, of course. So there is quite some questions regarding the sharing of information. What happens to that? So maybe Jessica, can you explain a little bit? There's a lot of concerns in your audience about what actually happens, whether data is it also shared with national authorities? What are some of the risks in relation between producers, national authorities? Can you tell something about how this information is being collected and who actually has access to it?
Well, you must see the, I'm sorry. You must see the tracer system as being a system that only holds a couple of things that you need to do the due diligence statement, or at least all the things you need for the due diligence statement, but only a couple of things that are in your due diligence system. So indeed, the geolocation points are in the due diligence statement, and information about the product and information about the quantity of the product, but not all details about all the specific owners of the land are in traces. So that information is sort of split. And only when you decide to share the due diligence statement with the ones that are upstream in the supply chain, these companies can see your geolocation points where you have sourced your goods. And there is sort of a limit to what they can see. Only if you allow them to see, then they can use that. That said, maybe it's also a good moment to tell a little bit more about this due diligence statement. It is, for example, I saw a question in the chat. It's, for example, possible to upload many plots of land into one due diligence statement. So you don't need to do that separately. Although there is one limit, and that is that it all has to be from one country. And there's also the possibility to upload more plots of land than you have actually sourced from. We have called that declaration in excess. So that means that if you're sourcing from a number of plots throughout a year, for example, you can do the due diligence statement about all these plots, although you are emphasizing on the fact that not all plots have delivered to specifically this delivery that you're going to import at that moment in time. And another point to make is that as such, the due diligence statement is not enough to prove that all requirements of EUDR have been met. So it is important to, for example, traders upstreams, they have the obligation to ascertain, to double check if the operator has done its due diligence correctly. So although the due diligence statement number can be obtained from the operator, the trader still has the obligation to double check the information with the operator. So it's not that if the moment you have received the due diligence statement number, you have completed all tasks that are required from you. And these tasks, they can vary between being an operator and a trader, and also when you're an SME or not. So I would therefore advise anyone who is in the chat or in the meeting now and is doubting on under which regulation they fall to double check our website or look into the regulation and find out to which specific requirements are applicable for you.
All right, thank you so much, Jessica. So I still see lots of questions coming in, and we also have a question regarding assurance, how that's going to be managed, and whether there's, for example, private certification like Rainforest Alliance, whether that's going to be an acceptable standard. Julius, do you think you can answer this question?
Yes. And I have to be a bit careful here. So I think what is important to note, first of all, is that under the EUDR, it is the operators and traders that bear the burden of proof and the responsibility to ensure that their products are deforestation-free and legally produced. So they can make in their due diligence process that they use to show the competent authorities that their products are compliant, they can use third-party verification, like certification like the Rainforest Alliance standard, for example. However, operators and traders, as I said, they are responsible. So they, regardless of having a certification or using certification by the producers, if they are certified, they in the end are responsible for their due diligence system. And if there's non-compliance found within their system of the products that they import, they cannot just say, but it was checked by a certifier, so I did my work. No. So it is very good to, if you're looking at using third-party certification, to really understand, okay, what is being certified? What are the quality controls and the assurances this certification scheme is providing? And this will also be a question that operators and traders use to assure their, or if they are buying from you. So if it is a certification scheme that is, for example, not completely EUDR compliant, this will mean for them that there is still negligible risk and they cannot depend on that certification scheme under the EUDR. So this is important to take into consideration when looking at different certification schemes and what works best for you. But in general, I would say the work of certification, and I would say quality certification schemes, can really help you as a producer, as a seller, but also as an importer, to help understand your risk and to work on your due diligence process as such. So it can be a helpful tool, but really ensure that it looks at the right things and does the right things.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have another question, which is, I think, not just regarding Latin American countries, but maybe another question to you, Jessica. So the question is, in Latin American countries, it is very difficult for farmers to have property title. How can we prove? How can in these countries, how can they prove the legality of documentation? Is there any advice you can give in this case of the absence?
Well, it's very hard for me to do a general statement about that, because of course I don't know all the details that are applicable in this situation. What I would suggest that in particular cases like this, that if this is, for example, a well-known situation, something that, for example, NGOs can confirm, or other independent parties can confirm, or I would try to look at other, how do you say that, details or proof in order to emphasize that the local legislation has been met, and try to get that information upstream. But it's very difficult to now make a statement on, okay, that type of document is approved or not, for one, because we don't make statements like that. It's impossible for the competent authority to say, okay, if you just give us that document from that section of the world, then all is fine. We can't make a statement like that. And the other one is that this could vary from year to year. So it is basically up to the importer or up to the operator to establish what information is required, and then provide enough information to support that decision on, okay, here is the EUDR requirements have been met in this particular case.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. So I actually have a question to you, Julius, with regards to the timeline of the implementation of the EUDR. Do you expect any delays, or can you tell a little bit more about the rollout of the EUDR? What are the expectations there? Because there's still some information missing.
Yeah, sure. So the EUDR has been adopted. This means that it is now enshrined in EU law. And this means, as member state, that we have to also adjust our national laws to comply with the EU regulation. And this has to be done before the end of this year. So anyone wondering, okay, what will happen? Will there be room? Do we get more time? Is it going to be postponed? From my perspective, I can say, do not count on this. This would mean renegotiations and so on, and there is just no time to do that. And furthermore, we as member states and also the Parliament and the Commission, we have agreed to the EUDR with a big majority, actually. So I do not foresee any reopening in that regard. On the other side, we are in track of implementing the EUDR. Of course, this poses challenges, and we also see that there's questions still open. So as member states, we're working with the Commission to work on the interpretation still of the text. The Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free supply chains is also still in development. So we see that there is still a lot going on now and within this year and the coming months to give this clarity, but also from a national perspective to ensure, for example, that our national laws are EUDR compliant, and that Jessica and her colleagues can do the enforcement, for example. So these are all processes that are still going on. I can only speak for the Netherlands. We are on time, and we expect to be ready, as I said. And I do not foresee that the EUDR is going to be postponed. And even if it were, it is not going to be changed. So sooner or later, you will have to comply. And I would call on everyone here to really start preparing. It is there. It is already in EU law, and it is not going to be changed.
Okay, thank you so much, Julius. So we probably have time for 2 more questions. So I have a question to Ruben. So there are some questions regarding databases system use. Can you tell a little bit more whether companies will be able to connect their own databases or systems to traces, as suppliers buying from smallholders and selling to several exporters, how should they anticipate working with all these different kind of systems?
Thank you for the question. I don't know as much about that system itself, the information system. I know that in this phase they're testing APIs to allow that companies to be able to make that connection with their own system. If one of the other panelists has more knowledge on that, then please fill in after me. But I thought it was important to address this as well from a full supply chain perspective, where in traceability, I've worked in cocoa traceability for 12, 13 years now or so. So and I've seen a lot of different traceability systems. There's certification programs have systems, all companies have their own systems. And not all of these systems are connected to each other. But it's really important to keep an eye on these developments as well. There are some producing countries that are developing their own systems, like Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana are developing national traceability systems that might be able to help here with traceability. Companies have their own systems, as I mentioned. This could also be something to consider when you're looking at certification programs that are able to offer full traceability from beginning to end. Although, as Julius pointed out, that's very important, that it can only be used to support your compliance. It can't be used to prove compliance. But even before you get to the point where you're able to submit your data, there are various ways to make sure that you have that full traceability in place. So being able to connect those systems is very important. And I don't know if one of my fellow panelists has something else to say about actually connecting with the information system, or should we leave it at that? Thank you.
Maybe if I may add to that a little bit, because I saw more questions on the information system, also when it will be online. So what Ruben said on companies being able, so operators and traders being able to link their own system through APIs, that's currently in process. What the European Commission said is that the pilot that was done at the start of this year really gave them a lot of insights, and they're currently developing the system, the traces system, the IT system, to be ready by the fourth quarter of this year. Well, like many of you, we also have to take their words for it. We also depend on that system to do our own controls, for example. But what you hear from the Commission is that the development is well on the way. And I would like particularly, if I may shortly address the question that Robin Francella also put he's asking about, can information later be added? And for now, I would say no. So if you, as an operator or trader, submit the information for a shipment, it has to include so all the geolocation data and how much it is, and also connected to the diligence statement. So these three things are the only things that are going to be uploaded in the traces system, in the IT system. All the other information related to shipments, to your own due diligence process, an operator or trader keeps to themselves. They do not have to share this in the traces system, but only share this with the competent authority once they do checks. But it is not later, once you've submitted your statement and you get a code from the traces system, that is it. And perhaps there will be small amendments being possible, but it's not possible to submit something and then a whole time later come back to it to make amends, because that would mean there would be enormous gaps in the system which wouldn't allow for checks and controls and circumvention and so on. So this will not be possible.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you very much, Mirte, and all of the experts for answering all of these questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and it is only time for our closure. But before we come to that point, I would like to close off with some final but very important recommendations from our experts. Ruben, Julius, and Jessica, what would be your final recommendations? And Ruben, could you start, please?
Thanks, Chelling. My recommendation would be for SME exporters exporting to the EU markets to invest in your own capacity and make sure that you understand the EUDR. And attending this webinar is a great step towards that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. How about you, Julius? What would be your final recommendation?
I agree with Ruben. On top of that, I would say in case of doubt, really also use the free information that is out there. I supplied some links as well, but reach out to your partners in the supply chain as well. So do not wait and get started.
Thanks. How about you, Jessica? What is your final recommendation?
Yes, as Julius already said, get started. And one of the main things to get started with, in my opinion, is to make an overview of which regulation or legislation has to be met by you in order to produce cocoa legally.
Thanks a lot. And last but not least, Mirte, what is your final recommendation? Mirte, you're muted, I think.
Yes, okay, so thanks again, Chelling. So of course, the wonderful tip that I can give our audience is to check out all the reports, the market intelligence reports that are being published on the CBI website, which is also going to be the one on the EUDR, which we discussed earlier today. So let me just give you a very quick tour to the website. So you just go to www.cbi.eu, and then you go to the market information, and there you have the different sectors that we focus on, including the one on cocoa and cocoa products. And here you can find all the different kind of sector studies, as well as tip studies, product fact sheets, country fact sheets. And finally, the best way to stay informed of all the publications that we are going to have is, of course, to subscribe to the newsletter.
Thanks. Ruby, Jessica, Mirte, Julius, thank you all, and especially our audience, thank you all for joining us. I hope to see you next time during our next webinar. And to that time, goodbye, good luck, and see you later. Bye.